Joe. So while higher ed is often viewed as being more diverse, 30% of higher ed staff is non-white, and 25% of staff in information technology are women, despite women making up half of the workforce. These statistics are not only upsetting, but we realize that they are hurting our industries. So HETMA and Avixa have partnered to create the PRISM Scholarship. The intent of the scholarship is to encourage those underrepresented people to become active leaders and role models for technology managers in the higher education space. With 10 scholarships for CTS training and testing and a trip to Infocom, this is a groundbreaking initiative for those disenfranchised. The PRISM Scholarship is one step we are taking to dismantle the glass ceiling. So today we thought we would talk about the next steps that we see the industry and places of work taking to eliminate the race and gender gap in our favorite industries. So let's keep it safe and supported and get this discussion started. Let's start with introductions. Joey, do you want to kick it off?
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody, and afternoon and evening, it sounds like. Thank you so much for having me, HETMA. My name is Joey Lloyd. I am the Senior Director of Communications at Avixa. And for anyone who was at Infocom and got to see us talking about the PRISM Scholarship, Joe and I may have done some dancing and screaming and yelling all across the stage. So I am really proud to be here and be a part of this panel. Thank you for having me.
Great. Frank?
Hi, my name is Frank Padikkala. I'm a technical sales engineer at Audinate, but I also have the honor of being the chair of the Avixa Diversity Council. And thank you for having me.
Great to have you. And Kayden?
Hi, everyone. I'm Kayden Kassof. I work at American University and helped develop the PRISM Scholarship. I'm also heavily involved in CCMC and getting their new DEI initiative going.
Okay, so to get started, let's talk about what does diversity look like right now in the AV industry?
Perhaps it doesn't.
The awkward silence, right?
Perhaps it doesn't. I think that there are some really wonderful both companies and individuals that have raised their hand and said, we want to be a part of this and we want to see more. While it is new to start asking for this demographic data, which means it's somewhat hard to come by and people are not always sure that they want to share it, we have started to see little bits and pieces of that. So we know that women are absolutely underrepresented at Infocom. We know that women are underrepresented across the workforce in terms of their salary. And we know that there are groups of people out there that have really hand raised and they've said, we want to see more, we want to do more, but it's still lacking.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And the challenge a lot of times with finding the diversity or defining diversity is that, in my opinion, diversity requires to be defined by you, the individual, by you, the organization, by the group of people that you're involved in, because every different space has challenges that is pertinent to its own group of people. And so rather than looking at it from a textbook, all right, let's raise the bar in terms of, gender inequality. Let's get more equity in terms of, workplace environment. I think it's critical that you define diversity. And that's where a lot of times, a lot of organizations fail, not because they're not well-meaning. They do want to move the needle in the right direction, but at the same time, it becomes more about initiatives and it becomes more about checking boxes. So defining diversity is probably the most important question that you could have asked today. And unfortunately, my answer is going to sound vague because statistics will obviously back a lot of the challenges that we're facing. That's a great thing. And there's been a lot of work put in by Avixa, the council. And to give you a little example, the Diversity Council conducted a survey last year. And our first and foremost lessons learned from the survey is that we got 1,400 respondents for the survey, which shows in no way a representation of the magnitude of the AV industry. So it doesn't point to lack of channels. You know, it was well promoted. It was sent out in emails, social media posts. We did a lot of talk about it. But the challenge there is that there is an information gap. A lot of times when you try to define diversity, we end up kind of talking about race, gender, sexual orientation, but diversities are representative of social inequalities. The need for diversity comes by targeting those inequalities and information gaps, communication problems. And that is kind of reflective of my journey as the chair of the Avixa Diversity Council as well. I mean, I took it on 6 months ago, a little bit more over that. And while it's a great place to be in, it was also kind of challenging knowing that we live in a time when diversity is a taboo topic. There are lots of conversations where we don't want to have, and we try to keep diversity safe and friendly, and we don't want to go into those areas. And I don't think that's true, because diversity is a human problem. The only reason why diversity is not accepted, or, you know, people say we don't need to be talking about this, it's because for long, how do you see diversity news articles? Just, I mean, and I have some references from the tech industry. AV is kind of, you know, doing a lot of good things. But at the same time, what do you see? We see there is a serious lack of diversity. There are not enough representation. It all points to problems when it shouldn't be a problem. It's a human thing, and humanizing diversity is what needs to be done. I'm sorry, I'm kind of taking over the conversation, but we need to humanize things, and to do that, we need to communicate. I'll let the others talk now.
I think, Frank, you pointed at something that I think is ultimately really, really important. We spend so much time with our coworkers and at work, whether that is now hybrid or whatever that looks like. But there was a study that was done last year, and it particularly focused on women in the workforce. And this particular quote came down about Black women in the workforce and why so many women are pulling back during the pandemic. And one of the sentiment quotes that came out of it was that Black women in particular felt like that conversation was not happening and could not happen. As we look at our coworkers and we think about things that happen in our families, we share that with our coworkers. And when someone passes away or something happens, we share those emotions back with the people that we work with. And for Black women during the course of the pandemic and during this time of upheaval, no one knew how to talk about it. No one felt safe to talk about it. So we ignored it. And that's part of that piece that's missing, that human nature that's missing, that Frank is talking about.
It's almost like there's I'm sorry, Kayden. Yeah.
I was just saying, no, you bring up a good point. Is like a lot of this comes down to just being uncomfortable with talking about certain topics because they've been taboo for so long. And, you know, we don't want to offend anybody, whether it's the person that's the subject of the topic or someone else in the room that feels awkward. Like there's all kinds of feelings around it. And then you add into that, like what's professional in a workplace, like what's appropriate to talk about in a workplace. And people have different feelings about what's appropriate and not appropriate in the workplace. And so there's like all these compounded issues around why it's difficult to talk about things. And I mean, it's more than just having conversations, but I think that it all starts by having conversations, right? Like as soon as you meet someone and can have a frank conversation with them about whatever they are, like I'm trans. I'm not shy about talking about being trans. I have conversations with people about being trans or being queer. Like now they know someone who's trans or queer, and now they're like less afraid to talk about those subjects. But it's so hard. It's a lot harder to talk about those things with regards to race, right? If you don't already have like a baseline friendship or comfort with somebody, it's a lot harder to talk about those things. Or so like getting past those difficult conversations and just like learning how to open up, be receptive, ask someone how they feel, and not try to interject your own feelings, but like actually listen to them, is going to be the basis for like forming these relationships that are going to help us be able to move forward.
I think it's so incredible, Kayden, that you have shared your story and you've been so open to share your story. And we talked about this as we were prepping for this call, when I had a chance to listen to your podcast that you had done with Mike. It's so important for cisgendered people like me who don't always have the opportunity to get to know people on that personal level, because then it becomes part of my life and part of my empathy and my ability to stand up and say, yes, these are the things that we need. And not just me, but I mean that the royal me, we, all, us. So thank you for being willing to share your story. I'm seeing in the chats people saying, yes, it's time to share those stories. It's time to make people uncomfortable.
I mean, I have to do that too, right? Like, I'm a white person and I have to have those difficult conversations with my colleagues that are not white. And I take that very seriously in my workplace. And we do have difficult conversations, and you know, and I've had to learn how to be respectful in this area. But I think overall it like makes us tighter and more cohesive as a team. And in turn, it makes us more open to including more diversification, more inclusion, you know, aspects into our work culture.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's almost like we need to diversify our diversity efforts and not just talk about the things that we're comfortable with. And a lesson that I learned in the beginning, and I keep saying that to myself every day, is that it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to be human. And that is key to communication. Effective communication cannot happen until you build a safe space for people to be able to share what they need to share. And a lot of times building a safe space, again, this is one of those things that's very hard to define, but it's important that we listen. We listen to the stories. Kayden has shared an amazing story. I'm sure there's plenty of people out there, but the challenge is they don't want to share them. And so it's not just about providing an opportunity. It's about building the infrastructure that makes them comfortable to do it. And at the end of the day, we are all looking to be part of a community. And the advantage that AV and higher ed, for that matter, have is that we already have a commonality in that we are aligned by the technology and the systems that we work on, by our workplaces. It is the logical next step to become an inclusive space by saying, this is what we do, you're welcome. Please come in and just speak up. And if you don't want to speak up, be a part of the journey, just listen. And that's why it's important that every community effort out there, whether it be a group of people, just 2 or 3 people coming together and just chatting, anything and everything needs to be promoted, supported, and helped, because everything tips the scales. I learn things every day, and the only way you can learn is by in going out of your comfort zone. Like if this was a panel on IT or cybersecurity, I would do it with my eyes closed because that's what I love. AV, sure. But when it comes to things that you don't know, being pushed out of that comfort zone is necessary. And that's why I say, this is a human problem. We are trying to become inclusive by including everyone into our conversations.
So Frank, there was a question in the chat about how do you know that you've created a safe space? And I think that you've done a tremendous job in that, in both the monthly council calls and in your recent award-winning event. Maybe you can talk about how you created that safe space.
So I think I like to use the word dynamic. I know I'm not supposed to use pivot today and a few others, but I will use dynamic because there is no agenda to building a safe space other than it needs to constantly evolve. And in order to evolve, you need to keep listening and you need to keep feeling things out. And I'm kind of trying to look at the chat too. So it's important that we when building a safe space, it's about letting people feel that this is a safe. Now, when I say feeling, I'm going to add the word experience. We are the experience masters. In AV, we build an experience. And how do you build an experience when you design your projects? Do you just listen to the CEO, who's obviously paying for it? Do you listen to the purchasing person? No, you listen to the users, because everybody who's interacting with the system on a daily basis needs to be a part of the experience. And the same thing applies to a safe space. It's about constantly evolving and creating opportunities. And to Joey's point, and I'm very fortunate and thankful for our AV Nations Award for AV Meets Food. AV Meets Food conceptually was a very simple thing. I can define it in one sentence. A group of people coming together and talking about food. But what is food at its core? It's a representation of who we are. It's your individual journey. It's a part of your culture. It's a part of your family. And that's what I've always liked to define diversity as. Diversity is an individual's journey, and it's a combination of race and gender and upbringing and social financial backgrounds and country and languages and everything. And it comes to you as an individual. And in order to achieve a place of acceptance, that's when we say, this is diversity, right? I accept you for who you are. I accept your journey. There's a shared and a mutual understanding of who we are. I accept you. And that was the concept behind AV Meets Food. We got people to come along. There was a little, a caveat to it. You could prepare a food that you like, but share a story. And, Joey was one of our amazing chefs who came along. She made a latke, and I learned things that day. And at the end of that call, which was done over Zoom, we had 4 people present the foods they made. What we understood is that there's more commonalities than things that divide us. We all have that crazy cousin at our parties. We all have a very picky stickler of a grandma who says this is the only kind of seasoning that you can use in that. We all have that. There's commonalities in being human. And that's what AV Meets Food was. And that's kind of the basis of every conversation that we're trying to do. Keep it small, keep it friendly, keep it open, and have an agenda, and have some sort of a plan. Although not written in stone, we did try to say, this is a storytelling event. It's not about the food you make. But, the people who presented were amazing. The food was great too. I wish I could have tasted it. But I'd like to believe we successfully told the story. And Joey, please, I want to hear your personal take. We've spoken about this, but, tell the group what it meant to be a part of something, a Zoom call that was talking about food.
So anybody who knows me knows a couple things. 1, I talk about my children incessantly. 2, I eat all the time and I love food, like really love food. And my whole team knows, they see me eating all day, every day. I'm actually in my office today for the first time in a while, and I'm struggling because I can't walk into my kitchen and get food. But in addition to that, I'm also Jewish, and it's something that I was born and raised. I've dealt with anti-Semitism in my life, and my children have dealt with it. So while I may be a white woman, and by looking at me, you don't know that there are differences, there are for me. Being able to share not only 2 things that I care about, which are food and my children, because my son took part in it with me, but to be able to share a tradition that is so important to me. The making of latkes is probably, it was by far and away the simplest dish that was cooked that evening. And yet the joy of being able to share something that was so important, and was part of my traditions and the way that my house smells. I joke, the fried oil has an odor, for anybody who's not aware. And I say it's my home now smells like that of a Jewish woman. Like, you can tell a Jewish mother lives here. And that's what I got to share back with this community. And it was a part of me that I don't often get to share. And I felt like such a beloved member of the community. It was so important to be a part of. And I can't say enough about it, honestly.
Yeah, these are great.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I wish I knew about AV meets food earlier so I could have been watching, but I definitely will tune in if you're going to keep doing it or continue to do it.
Yeah, we definitely want to keep doing it. We're hoping to do a part 2. We'd like to do it in person too. I mean, again, we're figuring out the logistics of a lot of these things, but every single council initiative, we want to make sure that diversity is talked about every time we meet, every time we come together. But at the same time, it's about understanding that commonality, and accepting people. And the more we grow as individuals in our learning, the more we can build that ideal world that we want to live in. We want to leave this world in a better place for our children, for the next generation. And the best way to do that is by not repeating the mistakes that's been historically done. People not talking is a huge problem. People not communicating is a big challenge. You need to break it down. It doesn't matter how you do it. Some of them will become uncomfortable. Sometimes you'll have to apologize. Sometimes you'll be way out of your comfort zone, but it needs to be done. It has to be done.
Kayden, how do you know that you're in a safe space?
Yeah, so Karen had brought that up earlier in the chat, and she made an excellent point. It's when the people that don't normally or haven't historically felt comfortable suddenly do feel comfortable. That's when you know you've achieved a safe space. And, activities like AV meets food, or even just respectful conversations around some current event that has happened. In order to create these safe spaces, something I recently told a friend is that trust brings trust. So by sharing a story and trusting people that you're around with something personal allows them to realize, okay, I'm being trusted with this personal information. Maybe I can trust them too. And that's how these conversations get started. Someone has to be brave enough to trust those around them with some sort of personal story. And once that happens, you can continue to build on it, right? Like, Joey, you trusted everyone to share your Jewish heritage. Perhaps in a different day and time, you wouldn't have felt so trusting to that happen, to do that, right? You would try to be passing rather than exposing yourself. And, I think that is like a really big part of building these safe spaces. A lot of times, some of my schooling had to do with, I took this excellent class called Peace Pedagogy, and it was basically an entire class around creating safe spaces in the classrooms. And it was really for people that were like going in the Peace Corps and stuff. But basically the whole class was about doing icebreakers, and we all like roll our eyes at icebreakers like they suck. But good icebreakers don't suck. Good icebreakers give people an opportunity in small groups where it's less intimidating to share something personal about themselves, something meaningful, not like what I had for breakfast or, whatever it is, but like, and then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And eventually you build a trust among your office or among your colleagues. And when you have trust, then you can have these really difficult and taboo conversations, because you can trust that your colleagues aren't going to judge you or they aren't going to say something nasty to you. And it's about sort of recognizing and appreciating the differences between each other and not just trying to pretend that they don't exist. We went through this phase the last, like 20 years ago in the 90s, it was really big, right? Like, oh, I don't see race. I don't see these things, right? I see everybody is the same, but that's not true. Everybody is different, and we have to see everyone's differences to be able to see them as individuals and as people, and then to be able to respect them. So sharing a story, building that trust is how you create these safe spaces, and recognizing that we can all be different and still have commonalities, and those commonalities can connect us and help us build friendships and bridges that supersede or overcome the differences that we have. But it doesn't mean that you're just going to forget that someone grew up really poor, or someone grew up maybe they were the only Black person in their white neighborhood and grew up with constant racism, or, speaks English as a second language, or is so queer they could never hide it, and they are, come from a very, very conservative background. There's all these things that are there that make us different, but it's about balancing seeing everyone's individuality and recognizing them, but still finding those commonalities to build and forage connections and friendships. So yeah, someone's got to rip off the Band-Aid and be the first one to share an awkward story to build that trust. And I'm an extrovert, so that's usually me. I'm like an oversharer. I'll tell you anything. And I think that's one of the reasons why my office in particular has a lot of trust, a lot of camaraderie. We have like no turnover in our office ever, and our university in particular is a really high rate of turnover right now. I think that's really common in higher ed, which is creating its own problems, both in, losing diverse populations because they don't feel appreciated. We had like almost every person of color leave one department last summer because, well, I can't speak for them, but clearly that's some sort of message, right? And now we have an opportunity to hire again. We can do more to both bring in different types of people with different backgrounds and different thought processes, but we also have to do a much better job once we hire them to be able to keep them and to be able to make them comfortable and to meet their needs, whether it's a need around race, whether it's an accommodation need. We often don't think about or talk about, disabilities, mental health problems. There's all kinds of other things that are wrapped around these diversity conversations that can make it really awkward to have, talks, especially around mental health, because a lot of people have mental health problems and they've been taboo for a very long time. So there's a lot of work to do.
Absolutely. And add to that an intersectionality where any given person can have experienced multiple of these diversities, race, gender, mental health. And now you're dealing with an individual here. You're dealing with a problem who is unique to that person. And from an organizational perspective, you can spend decades of training saying, all right, you got to attend this special session on unconscious bias. You got to do this on this and do this on this, but it will never, ever impact the general movement, because from an individual perspective, you're trying to check a box. You're just trying to do it because it needs to be done. It needs to be done with purpose, and purpose can only be done by an individual. You need leadership there, and consider every person passionate about this a leader in the circle. It's about, it could be a group of 2 people, it could be a group of 15 people, you could be a manager, you could be a contributor, it does not matter. It requires a combined effort of everybody wanting to be a leader, an ally, a supporter, a participant in this, and owning up to who you are. And I've experienced this myself, when I first started, becoming more, social on social media and things like that. My first few AV happy hour calls or general networking events, which were virtual, I was generally awkward. I didn't know what to say. I mean, I would say that even today. And I was more comfortable in a group of 5 people, but when there's 60 people, I just listen, right? So do we pay attention to these things? When you plan your events, when you plan your initiatives, how much do you think about being inclusive about the different kind of people that are involved within your organization? Which is why from the onset of any particular DEI initiative, it's important to define things. I'll use the AV term, scope of work. You need to have defined what's diversity, what exactly are we trying to achieve by being inclusive, and what's the level of equity that we need to doing. And it's not statistics. It's about feeling, it's about understanding the people and just listening to them.
And I think Cody in the chat raised a question kind of, or something that he's thinking of in trying to raise the voices of people who are underrepresented. And he says that a reminder that as I lift and amplify one group, there's a chance to diminish another group, which can be an unintended consequence. Does anybody feel like speaking to that?
I mean, I'll talk about it. I think it's a really, I think it's important to keep that in mind. However, and this is probably going to be a really controversial thing to say, but I'm just going to say it because I'm that person. Right now, a lot of people think by lifting the stories of other types of people that we're diminishing the stories of the people who are traditionally in the news, which are cisgendered white people. And by lifting other stories, it doesn't diminish, I don't think it diminishes those stories, but it means that you might not hear them as often. And when that population is used to hearing stories about themselves and all of a sudden isn't hearing as much about themselves, it can seem as if they're being forgotten about or being swept away to make room for somebody else. But I think that it's a really fragile kind of way of looking at things, because and it really has to do with just what's been done in the past and tradition, and not being used to change. Frank, I see you nodding your head there. Do you want to add to that?
No,
I
I completely agree, because if you see a house on fire, you want to put it out first. If you've identified a problem, you need to get to it first. It may seem like, yes, you have a delivery problem where your Amazon deliveries are not getting to your house on time, but I get it. That's a problem. We need to do that. But at the same time, there's a house on fire here. It needs to be addressed. So I completely agree. There's a lot of fragile thinking in here, and it's been perpetuated over years of ignorance and lack of information. It's important that when we are trying to be inclusive, sometimes it does mean that we have to address the concerns that is right in front of us. And there's no soft way to put it. There is no need to feel left out, because at the end of it, there's an end goal here, right? At the end of it, we will have embraced our humanity of acceptance, and we are all equal. Nobody wants to be special. A diversity initiative is not about making some group, person, race special. It's about equity, right? They're not saying I want to be better than the other person. I just want to have the same opportunities you have, and that needs to be defined and worked on. Sadly, there's no better way to put that.
That's such a good way of putting it. Like, I don't want to be seen as more than. I just want to be seen as me, and accepted as me, and respected. And yeah, Karen put equity doesn't mean equality. Sometimes, then that's so true. Like, sometimes to get people on the level playing field, we need to do a little bit more for this person or a little bit more for that person, so that we can see everybody across the board in the same ways. And it's challenging and often controversial, because it can mean taking away from you to give to somebody else, right? And I mean, but I think it's really important to keep things in perspective and to step back and look at the bigger picture about what this means, why it's being done, and recognizing that we're all people, we're all humans, we're all here. We just want to exist, be respected, and be able to live our life in a meaningful way. And nobody's trying to take anything from anybody. It's just trying to be distributed differently so that it's more fair.
Yeah, and I like to use the term intentional inclusion. And just throwing it out there, we have a webinar coming up on March 10th, specifically on this topic. And at times, we do need to be intentional in our activities. And this being intentional, it may seem as though we are neglecting a particular group. That's not the effort at all. There's always purpose behind these things. But at the end of the day, building that environment which is diverse does require understanding the needs of the different groups. And there is no bad side to this. From a business perspective, from an organizational perspective, implementing things like this can only make you, your company, your group better, without a doubt. because diversity is not just, in those tangibles that we've seen. There's the intangible diversity of thought that people from different backgrounds bring to a conversation. And by enhancing on that, you become a smarter, more efficient group. There are definite business benefits to trying to be intentional about your activities there. And it may not be seen today, again, because this is not an effort. The deterioration that we've seen, the challenges that have seen, it's taken decades to come to the point where we have. So now we've turned a corner. We realize we need to start building up. It's going to take time, but every single step in that direction helps.
Can I also just say to Cody that I hope you don't feel like I was picking on you specifically. Your question just made me think about sort of a larger question and just experience that I see going on right now. So I just wanted to put that out there.
I think there's plenty of metaphors out there. We hear it in songs, we see it in memes, but we see it, I see it in my personal life. I mean, there's for women to women, we can all wear crowns, right? We can fix each other's crowns, we can all glow, we can all be a star. And I think we sort of talked around Black Lives Matter, and I heard it. And for anyone who's had children and had to sort of have these explanations or with their family, by saying Black Lives Matter, I wasn't saying that somebody else's didn't. I was saying that they needed the lifeline, they needed the help then and now. And I think that Kayden, you did a really nice job of talking about that and exploring that. And Frank, I mean, you say all the right things. I mean, I know for me, the work that we've done together over the past couple of years has been many mornings the reason why I was getting out of bed and going to go sit at that desk sitting in my house, was to be able to do this type of work, and what it not only made me healthier as a human, but our community healthier. And someone put that in the chat, and I think that's just fantastic.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think we have an interesting, we're in an interesting position with the PRISM Scholarship and having those 10 scholarships to give out. And I think we're having a hard time finding eligible candidates for that. Does anybody have ideas of how we even grow bring people into the industry in order to be able to nurture their education in the way that the scholarship is intending?
Well,
Yeah.
Sorry, Joey, you can go ahead.
No, go.
Okay. I was gonna say, from my perspective, working already in higher ed, I have a lot of student workers in my office, and our university actually has an audio technology program at it in addition to a film school. So I feel like I already have a pipeline of people that I need to really bug about applying. But and I think all of us that work in higher ed have, especially student workers or entry level people in their offices, that we should all be promoting this scholarship to. And I think that information about the scholarship is going to be sent out again during this conference so that it's fresh and everyone has all the details that they need. But I feel like with the scholarship, a lot of the problems that we're having with finding quote unquote eligible people, which is what we're asking, is anyone that's underrepresented in the AV community. So that's a lot, that covers a lot of people, but the AV community is still pretty defined about the type of people that work at it. And I know the integrator we use, or even just any integrator I've ever worked with, I think I've only ever seen one female technician on site in 12 years. So and we have people here all the time, we don't do our own installs. So I mean, there are, or maybe a handful of people of color. They're mostly white, they're mostly men. So I mean, breaking down that barrier even further, it's harder, and I don't know what those answers are.
I think the traditional marketing routes and the pipeline that you talked about, Kayden, are really, really important. I would say that there's also something else out there that's really important, and it is how we represent ourselves and who represents us as a community. I think that we have to self-police those that don't represent the open, welcoming, and belonging culture that we are trying to create here. And I will say particularly in the world of AV, when we allow people to get away with that and showcase that as our voice, it's not the right thing to do. So when you hear something that's wrong, it's time to stand up. When you see something that's wrong, say something. And I know that that's not always easy for everyone, but if we stop allowing those business practices and those same old things to happen, we will create an environment in which young people will want to come into and diverse people will want to come into.
Yeah,
I agree to that too. It's about actionable change. It's about making things that building that culture of inclusion. And to the question of how do we get more candidates, obviously the existing pipelines are great. We understand that, but at the same time, it's also about building on our outreach activities. Like, how much do you where do you look for your candidates? Who are you reaching out to? And there's a challenge associated with that, right? Sure, you can go to a trade school or you can go to a tech school and say, hey, here's an opportunity to get into AV. Great. But are you also cognizant of that, the new person who's coming into the industry, what kind of an experience does he have? Because at the end of the day, it's not just about giving out a scholarship, getting somebody to work here in 1 or 2 years. There are plenty of options out there. The tech industry is booming at this point from an employment perspective. There's lots of job vacancies every day. You see people moving around all over the place. What would help them stay? And that is a question that can only be answered by your organization and the kind of people that you're trying to reach. So building that infrastructure needs to happen along with any initiative of trying to outreach. So it's easier said than done. It's very easy to discuss these things on a panel, but I do believe that AV has a lot of great leaders out there who are understanding of this and who have taken plenty of positive steps. A lot of times DEI panels and discussions, we're only talking about challenges, problems, this, that. But I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge a lot of great companies and individuals out there who have stepped out of their comfort zone. They've done it. They are visibly doing it. I know these are not the kind of people who would have said this 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but they're doing it right now. And whatever be the objective, whatever they're trying to do, lots of respect for the people who are taking, and I'd like to shout out Avixa. Over the years, a lot of times we talk about Avixa, and I'm talking about Avixa as somebody who's a council chair, but also who's been a part of the Avixa community. They have evolved. Every year there's initiatives within Avixa, and we're proud that the council has been in small part we're able to influence, and we can point out things and we can talk. And there's this channel of communication that Joey mentioned that we have established. It's about moving the needle, and there's a lot of positive things happening. So kudos to everyone who's trying. Keep trying. This is going to be a long journey. It's not going to, we can't say we have achieved diversity. That's not going to happen. It's going to be a journey. So right. But I'm glad that a lot of people are part of it.
Yeah, I mean, CCMC has been the same way. We've been doing a lot of work over the years to try to, we have interest group meetings at the conferences now around women in technology and around, a DEI group, which is, trying to have these difficult conversations around broader topics than just women in technology. And, we have more conference topics on it and more this and more that. And we're in the process of creating a dedicated group to do these things. And, so, it's an evolution for sure, right? And what diversity looks like is going to change over time because the population is going to change over time, right? And people are going to change over time. Socioeconomic status in a specific location where your company is located is going to change over time. So it's a never ending journey, like you said, but it's certainly achievable. I think something important you said though, Frank, was that, we can advertise at all of these places like the tech schools and this and create this sort of pipeline to come in the industry. But when these folks start working at the existing workplaces, are they going to be welcomed or is it going to be too difficult, right? And it may be nothing outright bad is happening, but it could be little microaggressions or, you know, judging looks. It's not something, you know, that's really, you know, that you can discipline over, right? It's just like, it's a cultural thing that is really much harder to shift. And so we may bring them in and they may not stay. So it's going to be an ongoing fight of, again, coming back and making safe spaces where people feel comfortable and feel respected, feel listened to. And the more we can do that, even on like the micro level, just within our own offices, you know, that new person that comes in, they're going to come into this great supportive atmosphere and hopefully want to stay working there longer, right? And they're going to tell their friends. So there's like this top-down approach, but there's also this grassroots bottom-up approach, and we have to look at it from both directions. And that's where everyone in this group and everyone that we work with can be a change maker in this way.
And I think these are great points, and they can even be applied to just somebody having a bad day. If we wanted to look at it as just like, this is a better way to run our departments or run our businesses. Let's just enter every conversation with respect for the person that we're talking to and take that into consideration as an individual instead of, you know, not an individual. Okay, I think that we've wrapped it up pretty well. If we want to take it back to Joe, we'll just
or do we have any questions? Oh, sorry, go Frank.
Question?
No, I mean, if you're wrapping up, I do have a question for the community. This is something that I've, you know, started asking anything that I'm on. If there are suggestions or initiatives that you would like to see as part of the Diversity Council or something, I'll simplify the question. What would you like us to talk about? You know, please, you know, reach out to me. I'm available on LinkedIn, Twitter. I'm even on TikTok. Don't ask me how I got into that. But yes, please reach out, and we would love to explore the opportunity to, you know, just better educate, you know, better be a resource for a lot of these things. And if you're, as an individual, as a group, thinking about implementing DEI practices, do not think that you're alone in this journey. There's lots of resources available. We are not experts. I'm not an expert. I'm sure the people on this panel are much more qualified than I am, but I'm willing to give you time. That's what I can do for you. I will give you my time as much as I can to make sure that you're helped and you get the resources you need. And I'm sure that's a promise that every one of us will make at some point. You do have to give yourself to the community, and we are in this together. This is a journey.
Absolutely. I just want to say, Joanna shared earlier a link to the Loop Lab, which looks like an amazing program, and hopefully similar initiatives can be started in other places. I don't know who started that, but it's so cool. And as we learn about more of these things, like I get so inspired every time we have these kinds of conversations. And I really appreciate people that are doing that kind of work. So I also want to just put a plug in for the next session because I'm moderating it. And if you enjoyed this conversation and want to hear more about it, then please join us at 12:30.
You know, I will jump in. I do want to take a moment to kind of go around. One, if there are any other questions and people wanted to speak up, I know we've had the conversations in the chat, but if there's anything anyone else wanted to add to the conversation, I encourage anyone, please, you can raise a hand or whatever. And then also, Frank, this is what a best virtual event trophy looks like right here. You will be getting your great line right after HETMA 1R. So I'll put that right over here for everyone to watch next to my wife. There we go. And there we go. So
You know,
well deserved for your
Joe,
for your-
thank you so much. You were so supportive through the whole thing. You know, you backed us too. So I appreciate all the help. And again, the award is just like a small byproduct. At the end of the day, if one person is happy that yes, I felt like I was a part of something, that's our mission here, to make sure that we are as inclusive as possible. But thank you so. I didn't know we're getting a trophy. That's awesome. Thank you.
You
for
do get a
that.
trophy. Yeah, now you just have to make Tim deliver it to you personally. We do have a hand up. Someone has a hand up. I see a hand. Who has a hand up?
That's me, Joe. I think I
Oh,
can't
hey,
see anyone
Jason.
else. I just wanted to make a real quick kind of observation, and it's something that I've thought about a lot, in that these DEI initiatives and the kind of values behind this really are values of higher ed. And I thought Frank did a great job of kind of articulating it in that kind of project management or kind of scope of work speak. And I think that, and I would kind of, just kind of challenge folks as you learn more about, diversity and kind of learn more about this, to kind of think about it in that same way, right? I mean, we are constantly taking people's voices, in projects and elevating them, trying to get the users and engaging in conversations and trying to bring out, information and figure out, where are the, places where people, need things and whatnot. So I would hope that, as part of higher ed, these kinds of values are, kind of core and fundamental to these organizations. And so it's, the more and more that I'm involved in this, the less and less I think it's kind of something special or extra. It really is just an extension of that. So, when people are, if they're worried that they may not have the right tool set or kit, I mean, think about what you're doing when you're, kind of specifying or being an owner's rep or something like that. I think those things are very similar, and I think could be a great way for people to kind of move in and work with more confidence in these spaces.
I agree.
So good. So good. And kudos to whoever thought to do this, the spotlight. That was great. That's
Yes.
Good. That was good. Now, I'm just so inspired. I do want to encourage everybody again. This is something that's dear to my heart. And if I can be honest with you, I didn't know that would be as dear to my heart as it turned out to. One thing that HETMA did, it humbled me a lot. And, Kayden, obviously this goes all the way back to you, now a couple of years working in a, ever since the call out. But the thing is we have an opportunity, and I'm encouraged. I'm encouraged by the direction we're all going, and it's conversations like this that I love when I'm not the loudmouth in the group, because it lets me know just how much I have to learn and sit back and be inspired by everyone else's voices. And I think that's really what this is about. And when we have the PRISM Scholarship, that I encourage everyone to please get it out there and tell others. This is about giving a voice to people and a career line and all of the support needed to be successful in this industry. And we have an opportunity, we have a huge opportunity to help. And I look forward to one day when I'm about to say I look forward to one day when I'm dead, but you'll get what I'm saying. When I'm near my death and I get one of those 10 is elected chair of HETMA. That's the goal. When's that going to happen? Who knows? But we've got some time to go. But that's when there's a success in this org. So I thank you all. Can we go around and just have everybody say how they? I know Frank. Well, first off, everyone put your emails, or she started to do. Oh yeah, Joey did it. Everyone did. Knows how to get a hold, but I'll have to do it quickly so that it's on the recording and not the chat. Joey, how can people get a hold of you?
You can get a hold of me at jlloyd@avixa.org or at Joe Lloyd across all of the social medias. And keep in mind that you can come on down to avixa.org. You can find diversity initiatives all over our .com. And come check out unconscious bias training, our inclusive language guide, and lots of videos and content that you can check in on to help you across your journey.
Wonderful. Looking for InfoComm's right around the corner. Looking forward to connecting again. And Frank, how can people get a hold of you?
My email is frank@padikkala.com. I'm at Frank Padikkala across the socials. Frank Padikkala on LinkedIn. I usually respond pretty quickly, so please reach out.
Great. And if you could also drop the link back in, I know it's way up the chat for the Avixa Diversity Council, that would be great too, just to get people that. Kayden, how can people get a hold of you?
Kayden.kassof@gmail.com. Try to be easy. Not super big on social media, so I don't have those things, but yeah, through there, through HETMA, through CCUMC, kind of all over the place with that stuff right now. So
awesome. Awesome. Thank you. And thank you so much for just the inspiration for all of this happening. And Annie, how awesome, the rock star running this, moderating this panel. So thank you so much for doing that. And how can everyone get a hold of you?
That's a good question. I guess they can email me at afoster@wlu.edu. I am also on LinkedIn, but I don't know how to get me there.
And of course, our secretary for HETMA. So there you go. And I called this into session. Did you catch that? I called this into session. Huh? How about that? I can learn how to be in charge of an org someday. But again, I thank you all. You all deserve just quite an ovation. I appreciate this. And what an amazing way to kick off these 3 days. So thank you.